Welcome back to Pilgrimage, Manzanar Memory and Meaning. I am Elise, and today's episode is the third of a 5-part podcast series from the Asian American Christian History Institute, looking at the tradition of pilgrimage to Manzanar through story, theology, and community. This is episode 5, entitled Inheritance. We are recording this conversation on July 17th, 2025, with guests who are academics and public voices, all invested in the practice and purpose of pilgrimage. Joining me today are Dr. Johnny Ramírez-Johnson, professor at Fuller Theological Seminary, Dr. Alex Jun, professor at Fuller Theological Seminary, and Myles Haruki-Nelson, recent MDiv graduate of Fuller Theological Seminary. All three participated in the 2025 pilgrimage to Manzanar and have reflected deeply on its impact, especially within the context of faith and community. Each one of these guests brings wisdom from their work, their faith, and their family legacies. Thank you all for being here. I would love to begin by asking each of you to introduce yourselves and briefly share what drew you to participate in this year's pilgrimage, as well as about your current work or context.
We are all very humble and polite. Well, I am a member of the Central Japanese American Community Church that is just 1 block away from my home. And I am a husband of the one wife who chose me when I was in college. And I am a professor at Fuller Theological Seminary who looks at anthropological themes and the Bible using social sciences. A believer, a father, a grandfather.
Amazing. Thank you so much for being here with us today and for sharing about your church. Next, pass it off to Dr. Jun.
Yes, thank you so much for the invitation. It's great to be here. My name is Alexander Jun, and I am Korean American, born in the United States. And my late father had filled my mind with all of these great sayings, like if you're born in America, you can be anything that you want. You could be president. You can achieve anything because we're in this great country. And so it took years for me to deconstruct some of this thinking of what it truly means to be an ethnic minority, a Korean American in a country that didn't necessarily embrace what it meant to be an Asian or a Korean American. So it's been a lifetime of discovery and rediscovery, deconstruction and reconstruction of race. I also identify as a Christian, very active in my church and my former denomination. I attend Citizens Church in Los Angeles, downtown, a predominantly Asian American church that is both unapologetically Christian, unapologetically Asian American. And I have 3 children. They're all Gen Z, and we're blessed to be able to worship together, but to be able to have these conversations with adult children about what it means to maintain your faith and your ethnic identity as now 3rd generation Korean Americans. So that's the space I occupy, and I'm looking forward to having this conversation today.
Thank you so much. And Myles, if you'd like to share.
My name is Myles. I'm a 4th generation Japanese American. I really resonated with what you just said about sort of the racial deconstruction and reconstruction being this lifelong journey. And I guess to start, that's part of what drew me to the Manzanar Pilgrimage. I went when Fuller went 2 years ago, and because that, as a Japanese American, that event is so connected to my family history, going to the pilgrimage, it feels like an opportunity to return to who I am, and not only as an individual, but also, with everything going on with the deportations, with all the political stuff happening in the United States. I think there was part of me that was also hungering for connection to others who were also feeling the grief of seeing our systems being exposed in the way that they are today. But with that, on a personal level, as you mentioned, I'm a recent seminary graduate. I'm married. I have a Cavalier King Charles Spaniel, so I'm a fur daddy, fur parent. I don't know what the correct thing to say is there. And professionally, I'm going into hospital chaplaincy. So I'll be beginning a residency in a few months at a hospital out here near Pasadena. And then lastly, in terms of faith community, I also identify as Christian. I recently started attending a Quaker meeting, and that's sort of the direction that I see myself going in. But that's all, everything's really new right now in this life stage. So that's me and where I'm at and who I am.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing about yourselves. And I'd love to, hear more about what you've touched on in these introductions later in the episode. This episode is titled Inheritance. So I wanted to ask, what have you inherited, whether from family, community, or tradition, that has shaped the way you engage with memory, history, or your faith today? I also wanted to just give you the opportunity to jump in as you please, as your thoughts arise.
Well, I'm happy to start. As I think about inheritance, as a Korean American, you can take Alex out of Korea, but you can never take Korea out of Alex. The inheritance that I've received is one of fear and hate. If you know the long history of Korea, when before it was divided north and south, before it was gobbled up by the United States and other nations, it was under colonization by the Japanese. And so these are conversations that we don't share as often publicly, but amongst Korean Americans and Korean Koreans, we say, oh, did you grow up hating the Japanese? Did you grow up, we've got this whole thing called the quote unquote comfort women, right? The sex slavery of young Korean women and girls, decades of occupation, suffering, abuse, beatings, etc. And that's the legacy that we carry. And it's the inheritance of fear of knowing that this is what happened to our people under the hands of Imperial Japan, and hatred. To the extent that parents and grandparents today, there are people who still refuse to buy any Japanese products, will not drive a Japanese car, won't buy a Japanese-made television, etc. And so that's part of the legacy that I think is what feeds a lot of some Korean families. And that legacy then carries over into second generation, third generation. Unbeknownst to ourselves, we just grew up with this sort of fear and hatred. And that complexifies everything when we talk about what happened to third and fourth generation Japanese Americans, just like I am a second generation Korean American. So where is the solidarity? Where is the connection? Again, I go back to my own deconstruction of race and then the reconstruction of where solidarity and connection ought to be. But that's a long legacy of inheritance that we're still trying to overcome.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And I really feel like this is actually very relevant to the Manzanar experience because of the ways that Japanese Americans really kind of were isolated within the Asian American community while they were facing, mass incarceration. And I think that that's something for us to reflect on as a community, how we can really be standing in solidarity with those who are being oppressed, regardless of, their ethnic background or the troubled history that our communities may have experienced.
No, what y'all are talking about is so good because for me, it's touching up on how complex inheritance is.
That's right.
There's like the two sides of the same coin where it can be really easy to sort of idealize having an Asian American heritage or Asian heritage, but on the other side, the places we come from, we're not just inheriting one thing. So for me, with my connection to Manzanar, what I've inherited is as a fourth gen, and my grandparents, they weren't in the camps, but they lived in Utah near an exilic community. So they were second gen around the time of the war. I think because of the trauma of that whole period, the thing that I inherited was a lot of silence. There wasn't a lot of talking about what it meant to be Japanese. There was very much that mentality of we just gotta push through this, and we really just got to prove our worth as American citizens. And so that kind of demonstrates two sides of the coin, because on one side, there's been all this work that I've had to do to reclaim this part of me, and also to realize that, this heritage, this identity is part of my DNA, and it comes out even when we don't talk about it. At the same time, having an intergenerational mindset also allows me to honor that even though those decisions they made were really messy, perhaps they were also doing what they had to do to survive, and perhaps there's genuine value to that. So I feel like that's something that I've inherited, I guess more of an intergenerational mindset when thinking about growth and how this stuff works.
This complexity we have been talking about becomes solidified, materialized in Manzanar. We should begin perhaps by mentioning that Manzanar means apple orchard in Spanish. So, and before it was an apple orchard, the Spanish-speaking people were tending, was taken over by the American government. But before it was that, it was the place of habitation of native people that I am apologizing because I don't know their name. Perhaps Elise could Google and we could mention their name, the original inhabitants of the land. And in my blood, in my DNA, I have the same layering. So who is Johnny? Well, Johnny is a mix. I am a mestizo. I should say a proud mestizo. If I think of my grandparent on my mother's side, let's begin from the womb I was born, the fact that he brought $60 in his pocket and the fact that he made the Atlantic traverse in first class accommodation in the transatlantic voyage granted him citizenship at the port and a new name. He was originally Johannes Alexander Niros, and he became John Johnson by the power of the agent that stamped his passport, his new American passport. While he chose to marry, I should say on second marriage, the first wife of Puerto Rican descent. He ended up in Puerto Rico, but that's too long of a story. From Boston, where he first arrived, he went to Puerto Rico as part of the empire expanding routes in 1898. And his first wife, I guess, was too spicy, and he captured her or found her in bed with another man. He killed the man, and the man perforated his lungs with a gun, but he walked out and went to the emergency room and survived. And then married my grandmother, who was never allowed out of the house. At any rate, and she was in the first graduating class of normal school that was established by the US government to educate the population. At any rate, the point is she had native Taino blood and African blood. And the African blood, my wife and I just visited Ghana, and I gained a Ghanaian name by visiting a king of one of the tribes. Obviously, I cannot say if that was the tribe that my grandma came from, but she traveled the same travel, crossing the Atlantic from a little bit more southernmost from Africa, but to the same place, Puerto Rico. And here am I, with one blood that came on chains and another blood that came with citizenship because of where he was coming from. By the way, he was sent by his mother, my great-grandmother, because the Russians had just invaded Finland. That was before invaded by Sweden. Anyway, enough to say how convoluted my blood is and our histories are. Welcome to
Beautiful.
Manzanar.
Thank you so much for
So good.
sharing about your family history. I think that understanding our migration stories is such an important part of our inheritance, and being able to trace those lineages, I think, is also such a blessing as we can learn more about where we come from and from whom we come. I'd also like to ask about any responsibility, or in Hawaiian we say kuleana, that may come with inheritance. I know some of you briefly touched on this, but especially when it comes to painful or complicated histories, what do we do with what we carry?
What do you do, Myles?
I'll fix it. I'll give you the answers right now. Gosh, uh, I wish I had an easy answer to that question. I don't always know. I mean, I think as humans and Christians and everything in between, you know, just as part of being human, there's part of accepting that we're full of contradictions and full of multiple things that can exist at once. Uh, and so for me, I think of like for my identity, I'm also biracial. So I come from, my father is white, my mother is Japanese American. And I think of for myself growing up, I sort of internalized this mindset that I just had to be one thing. And so for me, growing up in school in a very predominantly white community, I passed as more so white passing than my siblings did. So I was sort of able to fit in that way. And I sort of grew up going like, oh, this must be who I am. But part of me leaning into my identity has meant embracing that both parts can exist in the whole and both things can exist at once. So I feel like in terms of connecting that to, you know, intergenerational traumas and things that our ancestors did, or the ways that they made a mess of things and the way that we make a mess of things today, I think part of it is just being able to hold the different notes almost like harmonies that fit together. And whenever we encounter a messy truth, being willing to sit in the discomfort of living with the pain and the question before real coming to that insight of how to integrate it. So
That's good.
it's not an easy process, but it takes a lot of patience. And I think of the poet Rilke, who had that line where he talked about living the questions. I think we got to be brave enough to live the questions of how to hold all of our stories. And even as we do that, I can feel within me, the more that I accept myself, the more it expands my capacity. This applies so well to chaplaincy, to hold space for the contradictions in others. So if I see like a hospital patient who is just like really angry and all the hospital staff completely hates them and they're like being a complete pain in the butt to work with, for me, because I understand those parts of myself, I could look at them and go into that room with the curiosity. I wonder what they're going through. So instead of approaching them from a posture of judgment or assumption, I can approach them with openness. But all of that work comes from being willing to embrace all of who we are. It allows us to extend more grace to others.
Good.
So, yeah,
That's good. Myles, I want to build on that idea of,
yeah,
and I really feel like it starts with an acknowledgement that there is a problem. There, an acknowledgement that something has been wrong that I've been holding on to. I think of my therapist who, whose their job is to help you see some inconsistencies that I hold on to as a truth. At my church, we've been going through family origin genograms and things like that, and and really, really helpful to see, oh, what are some patterns and thoughts that I hold on to as normal, as everyday, but rarely question it. And so I go back to my statement about the legacy of fear, the inheritance of fear and anger and hatred. If that remains unchallenged and unquestioned, we just perpetuate it. and we actually amplify it and make it worse. But what would that look like for a community? Not just individual therapy and counseling too, but collectively, what would that look like? And I think that's part of the journey for me as an educator and as a Christian to lean into that first and foremost for myself, to say, how much of what you heard from parents and grandparents, aunts and uncles, and community members, pastors, etc., who held to this anti-Japanese sentiment, how much of that has trickled down into you, so much so that you don't even realize that you carry hate, that you carry fear? Can we start with you? And then as I am deconstructing that and realizing, unpacking some of that, can I bring others, my other beloved family members and others along with me to say, this is how I've changed. I'm slowly starting to recognize, and then building that community from there. But I think I almost want to say it begins with acknowledging weakness, acknowledging my own brokenness, and then acknowledging our collective brokenness, um, and being able to name it and put it out in the center for us to wrestle with, even reject initially. I mean, it's almost like the 5 stages of grief. It's denial that this exists, and et cetera. And you negotiate, and eventually you finally come to a point of acceptance to say, wow, that's something I've been carrying and my people have been carrying. Okay, so now how do we rebuild? And so collectively, I think that's part of it for me, is how do we work across generations and work across all these dynamics?
Alex, what may I ask you a question?
Yes, please.
What about celebrating? What
Mm.
about celebrating who you are and
I love it.
all of these parts?
Yeah.
How does it feel for you to celebrate? I
Yeah.
ask because I probably am in the wrong place in my brain, but I keep celebrating all of this rape and all of these things that happened in the past that brought the genes that make me who I am. If it had not happened, I would not be here.
Yes, yes.
How
That's so
about that?
good. I mean, again, I think we've already found a little theme for ourselves, is the complexity of identity, the complexity of any feelings that we have. Can two things exist at the same time, right? Can we recognize the brokenness in us and also celebrate all that is good? I'm Imago Dei, right? I am made in the image of my Creator. And there's something beautiful about that, but
But
not at the expense of others.
yeah. But looking at what we celebrate, I am suggesting celebrating what we are calling wrong of the past. So not only celebrating what is good in us, but celebrating the whole, including what was originally evil. Isn't that what God does when he created me in the womb of my mother? Because that's what Psalms 139 verses 13 and 14 suggests, that we are wonderfully made. So God is celebrating all of those rapes and all of those things that happened before. Be careful, Elise, because the verse you just quoted has been so much misused. Romans 8:28. So it is safer a place like Psalms 139. But anyway, I hear what you're saying, and that is the direct implication of what I was suggesting. Yes.
I also just wanted to give you a chance to speak about how you may incorporate these new ideas or reflections into your scholarship or teaching or ministry. I know we kind of touched on this, and I also wanted to just give you an opportunity to say any closing thoughts or reflections that you may have as well.
I was very much spiritually touched when I saw the Buddhist priest during the service. I don't even know how to call it, doing a religious ceremony, a service, in front of this beautiful reminder of what happened there, that I don't know how to call it either. I don't think it's an obelisk, Well, that's what it looks like, an obelisk. So I was touched, and this means to me to incorporate in my class a picture from a little bit higher than the Bible, from God. When God is looking, and I am using the metaphor of God being above, it's a very biblical metaphor. When God is looking from above, he doesn't, or she, or he, or it doesn't have laser eyes that only look at my church. He has he, she, I, it has eyes. They have eyes that look at the whole world, including those Buddhist priests. And I thank God for that perspective. And that is a perspective that I need to be continually reminded. Because I like to tell my students that I have limits. And the limits are the bindings of the Bible. But these Buddhist priests that were there are part.
Beautiful. And I was, really touched to just know that there were people from all different backgrounds, all races, and from different advocacy groups that, care about this cause and support this cause. And so I am really grateful that, we are all able to come together and really remember this important piece of history.
Yeah, I think like what that brings to mind is the word that comes to mind from Manzanar for me was there was just this feeling of communal grief and communal solidarity. And I think going into the event, I, as a young person, as a progressive, as a Christian, as someone who really cares about the state of the world, I had been feeling quite isolated. And it's almost like what we see going on the macro level, and it's gotten even worse since 3 months ago. So it's kind of crazy.
That's
But
right.
it's so easy to feel this sense of powerlessness, like there's nothing we can do, no matter how much we call our officials, no matter how much we protest, there's nothing. But I think in this state where we're seeing how much little power we have in terms of the macro fascist level nature of this country, there's something that's so powerful about communal solidarity. And even if you don't have the answers, knowing that in your grief, in your protest, you're not in it alone. I don't know what exactly that means for action and moving forward, but I think that's a great takeaway from the trip is that this event that happened in my community's memory is connected to an event that's happening today. And the best thing we can do is not stand against one another, but stand with. And out of that space of sacred grieving, sacred solidarity, that's where actually liberative and generative, non-reactive action will come. So I don't know, the
That's
trip
right.
really did feed my spirit in a unique way this year because of everything that was going on. And it gave me a sense of, okay, this was really healing. This is really connecting. I want to find more of this. So,
Beautiful. Yeah, absolutely. As an educator, I think what I come away with is not only, I mean, to be future oriented with students, you have to look at the past, right? Those who fail to learn from history are bound to repeat it. And so you look back and you say, look at the patterns, look at the similarities that we see today. And so nothing was more in my face than standing in this pilgrimage with thousands of people, recognizing that what happened, what seems like a long time ago, is happening again today. And
mm,
so, yes, a collective grief, as Myles said, I think that's correct. But Johnny, leaning into what you're talking about, the celebratory
mm,
piece, and I think where I end is as much as we focus on the painful acts in the cruelty from a government against its own people, there was also something to celebrate, which was the rising up, the resistance, the resilience of people. And that's also an important lesson of the past, to see the hope in the future, to say, we will also collectively in solidarity rise up and defend ourselves and protect ourselves together. And we cannot forget that story also, because that's the ray of hope even today, that we're together in this, and that it's time for us to rally and remain in solidarity, to remain in community. And so I walk away with that little sliver of hope, to know that history has taught us that there is resilience and resistance that will protect us. And God has orchestrated this and given us the ability.
Beautiful.
Beautifully put. Thank you all so much just for being in conversation with me today. I really feel like this was a very enriching conversation for me, and I'd like to thank you for your thoughtful contributions. As we reflect on inheritance, we remember that the stories we inherit are blessings, gifts that shape our callings, challenge our imaginations, and draw us deeper into a shared memory and responsibility. This series is supported by the Asian American Christian History Institute at Fuller Theological Seminary, and it is a part of a broader effort to honor the lives, legacies, and faith of those who have walked before us. Thank you for listening, and we invite you to join us for the next episode of Pilgrimage, Manzanar, Memory, and Meaning.